that during the camp meetings, he would just listen to it, he would look at his wife, and when the Lord would speak to him through a sermon, he would write down the lyrics, or he would write down the tune, and his wife would write down the lyrics. By the end of the sermon, they would have completed the song, would teach it to the congregation, and by the end of camp meeting, they would have published a little hymn book. Well, if you have a person like this, it was inspiring other people to praise the Lord. And so now it was no longer about, wow, did you hear what this person preached about? No, just take the song, because it was a memorial of what they had heard of. And they wanted to take it in their various communities and then go from there. It was just accompanying this great revival and reformation.
The Lineage Journey podcast, unscripted conversations that aim to help you on the journey of discovering your lineage. Join us as we take a deeper look into past Lineage episodes and see the lessons we can learn for today.
Hi everyone, my name's Adam Ramden. I'm here with Lineage Journey, our Lineage Journey podcast. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation. Today we have a guest who is an expert in his field, and we're going to be covering the very interesting and important, sometimes controversial subject of music in Christianity, music in church history, music in Adventism, and we're going to see the role that it's played and the different challenges and what would you say, victories that it's had throughout our shared history. Our guest with us today is Dr. Erwin Nanasi. He is currently a pastor in Oklahoma. Welcome, Erwin. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
And just a little bit more about your background. You recently just finished your doctoral studies, if I'm correct, right?
Right. Well, it has been quite a journey. Obviously, my roots are in Germany, and my parents from Romania and Hungary and so forth. And as I transitioned as a missionary in the Arctic and then in America, did study theology and leadership, but eventually studied worship studies, which I really wanted to study. And because not a lot of institutions are offering that degree to begin with, it has been a joy. And I was able to do that at Liberty University, which was interesting too, because some of Adventist hymnody actually also is derived a bit from Baptist hymnody. And so it was interesting to be there and write about it and research about it and talk with other people about it. And so that has been a little bit of my academic journey, if you will.
Okay.
And I've been working with musicians and worship leaders and pastors for several years now, and has been a joy to see that not just in American context, but also somewhat worldwide.
Sure. Well, I've always appreciated your music and your playing. You played for my wedding.
Yeah, I did.
Kind of not important to our audience, but...
But music at a wedding is important. Imagine a wedding without music. It wouldn't go well.
It wouldn't.
No. Because it's a worship service, and that's the beauty of music. So music is integral if you think of, birth of Christ, right? Or the way that he was dedicated, and the way that he was inaugurated, if you will, by the people. They were singing Hosanna as they're coming in. Even when he was going to the cross, right before, he was singing the hymn with the disciples. Music was part of his life. Music is part of the Christian life because of that.
Yeah.
Weddings, funerals, you just think of the main events. Today you even have music in the elevator or in the doctor's office. People recognize that music is important.
It's a key part of our life. So we're going to look at music in our current Adventist history, music in the Reformation, music before the Reformation,
yes,
or New Testament, Old Testament. So I'm not sure where best to start. Maybe a quick question. Maybe you've answered a little bit. What role has music played in religion, and should it play?
Yeah. I think that's a really good question. Music is a gift from God, and it's something that we see from the very beginning, not necessarily chronologically in the Bible, but it's obvious that in Job, it's mentioned that the sons of God, if you will, were shouting for joy. We recognize that. We also see that God himself is rejoicing over us with singing, Zephaniah, right? Mm-hmm. And so you see that there's mentioning of music ever so often, and you just think, wow, is that perhaps a language of heaven? Is it so melodious that it's something that he gave to us And he didn't need to. It's like, food. You didn't need to make food tasty. You could have just made it functional, But he made it, beautiful. You can look at it. You can taste it. The sensories are involved. And music is like that as well. And quickly enough, you notice that there is a great controversy even with music because it can be used for good or for bad.
Mhm.
Just an example, some people wrongfully, I believe, think that music is a spiritual gift. No, music is a natural talent, and the Lord can give that to anyone. In fact, we know this because in Revelation chapter 18, out of the sudden you see that in Babylon, there will no longer be the poet and no longer will be the musician heard. So obviously there are people that can use this talent, for the wrong reasons. But sometimes you see that God takes a natural talent, like in the sanctuary service in the Old Testament, and he is dedicating and anointing the workers of the sanctuary and say, okay, now I want this to be dedicated for a spiritual purpose. And so I think that you see that as well in the Old and New Testament, also throughout history, that music, when not dedicated to the Lord and anointed for his purposes, that it can do a lot of harm because it is so powerful. It goes straight to the emotion, right? I mean, you have the little kids there maybe at a store and they're right in front of the television and the music is playing and they're just moving to the music and you think, oh my, look at my kid. It's just
for anything.
Yeah, right. Because it just goes straight to the emotional part of the brain, and it's really activating people to move, activating people to do things that they otherwise wouldn't. And so the older you get, the more cognitive you are about your movements and also about your worship. And God, I think, wants us to be engaged with our body, mind, and soul. And so music is actually something that can activate that, especially when you think of congregational worship. I mean, there's a reason why we sing before messages or why we have appeal songs.
Yeah.
Because it's saying, hey, we want all of you to be engaged in making this decision for God.
We got the music plays an integral role. Obviously, it goes back. You said it has good and bad. We understand that Lucifer or Satan was a musician in heaven, and so he understands the role that music plays and probably manipulates it, no doubt, to his own effect. But we're not really going to go into that side of music today. But in the Bible, you have the Old Testament where you've got the Psalms, which is essentially,
it's a hymn book.
It's a hymn book of David. You come to the New Testament and there's not as much or much music. And we often say, well, we're, our heritage today is the New Testament Christian church.
Wow, that's a good one. Yeah.
So if our heritage is in the New Testament Christian church, there's not much music there, but you've got all these hymns in Psalms. Why maybe the disconnect, or is that just a false disconnect?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The way that I can explain it is perhaps that thinking of the Romans that had these the power during those days and really were forcing everyone to worship the emperor, it made it fairly difficult for them to just up in the open worship God in song and in their prayers as they usually would. However, you do see that when Paul and Silas got thrown in prison, guess what they're doing? I mean, they have nothing to lose anymore. So they're like, let's actually worship God. And so they end up singing. And you see that in Paul's writings as well. He says in Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. So now he really specifically says, your Lord is Christ. And let that word of Christ dwell in you richly. And then he says, in teaching, admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with grace in your hearts to the Lord. Now, why didn't he just say, hey, just make music for the Lord? Yeah. Well, it seems that he was a bit more specific than that. He said, listen, there are the Psalms, they are there for your teaching. And the Psalms include, fairly all the doctrines that we hold on to. I mean, you see prophecy there, the sanctuary is there, the Sabbath is there, the second coming is there. All the things are there in the hymns, in the Psalms, if you will. Then he says, in the hymns. Now, this is a new word now, because hymns is from the Greek, and it was just an homage to a deity, if you will. It says these hymns as well, so that may be part of admonishing one another, and then spiritual songs. You see that he's specifying them because they all have a purpose. And sometimes just transition for today right now. There is variety even in the music of God. Some of them have to do with the teaching. Some of them have to do with explicitly talking about Christ, but some of them are also as an encouragement from me to you. And that's why he said, hey, when we come together, let the Holy Spirit lead, but not all at once, one after another. You may have a song, you may have, a prophecy, you may have. Well, back in the day, it must have been that the Lord may have taken over, that you would come to worship and say, the Lord has given me a song to sing. And so you see some of these songs fashioned even after that say, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Nobody knows but Jesus. Now, this may sound like a lament or straight going into gossip of how bad your life is, but not this song. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen. Glory, hallelujah. Glory, hallelujah. Well, this sounds very much fashioned like a lament. In the Bible, it says, I'm doing bad. Lord, don't forsake me. Look at the enemies. They're thriving. What about me? And the Lord is, okay, hold on. Watch me. Behold me. And while you're doing that, you're like, okay, Lord, you're on your throne. I understand. You will carry me through. And there's just something that happens when this is your song and you sing it. And there's somebody else who says, Adam, I was really blessed by what you were singing. I want to join you in this song. And so before you know it, you have somebody that starts singing and people that start repeating. And that is somewhat the concept that you see then played out throughout the history of time, and especially then as it gets to the Reformation. So music was not marginalized or neglected in the early Christian church. It just wasn't as highlighted because you had the various factors of the suppression of a leading country that said, hey, we don't want you to sing like this. We don't want you to pray. So you don't see it as often, but it was definitely there. And Revelation makes clear that, there's a lot of song also in heaven and also of those that are going to be living at the end time.
Okay. Well, all right. So we've got New Testament. If we progress forward, this is a huge swath of history, but let's go forward basically 1,000 years or so. So now we're deep in what is called the Dark Ages.
Yes.
We're deep in the time when, at least in Western Europe, there's only one religion or one church or one denomination.
Right.
You've got the Catholic Church.
Yes.
What role is music playing there, and what does it look like in the church at that time? Say like 11 or 1200s. What does music look like for the average person who goes to church on a weekend? What do they sing? Do they not sing? Do they listen to it? What's it look like?
You already had part of the answer in there. If you wanted to access music, it was only if you were in the church or if you were with clergy, which often was also coming to church, right?
Okay.
So they came to church, and that was the hub of getting access to music. And the music of that day would then include maybe the instruments that they had, although in 12 and 1300s, not quite as much. But you have the development of singing in such a way that it's not really about the buying in of other people. It is about what the clergy is able to perform up front for the people. We are teaching you. We went to the monasteries.
So it's a performance.
Yes, it's a performance. And so we are up front, and obviously much of it was...
Is that like Gregorian
chant that came as an outflow of that.
Okay.
As an outflow of that. So Gregorian chant then, for those that are not acquainted with it, although you could, search for it, Gregorian chant would be music that essentially puts a text, and the text that you have from the scripture, you would just try to put a melody on it.
Okay.
But you would sing it in unison, and you would sing it only with a melody without any harmony added. So once they had the printed paper, there are some depictions of artists that have painted it where you have one person kind of holding up a sheet and then people just surrounding them like in a half circle and trying to read from the same sheet.
Okay.
And the music is fairly difficult to reproduce. Yeah, and it's really not something that people... Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly. I was like, okay, where are we going with this? And then somebody just repeats that maybe after. And so later on, when the Reformation came about, they said, listen, we want people to be engaged. Is God only there for the clergy? Is it only there for people that speak Latin? This was what I just saying was already too advanced because it was in Latin, different language, and only one person leading.
So it's Latin, one person leads.
Right.
The congregation is not involved?
No, they're just listening. Because God is on his throne and you better be quiet.
Okay.
Because you're in his house.
So it's almost like watching a sermon kind of thing. You're not engaging in it.
Oh, you're not. The only way that you're engaging is you better bring your offering. And if you're not bringing enough of an offering, or you're paying for whatever else that needs to be paid for, then you have no room here.
So the Reformation comes, and how does the role of music switch, or how does it progress or change?
The Reformation really throws this upside down and harkens back to the roots in the Old Testament.
Okay.
And so the reason why I think it's worth mentioning is because in the Old Testament, you notice that whenever sacrifices were brought to the sanctuary, it was accompanied with songs. There were, in fact, no sacrifices given without the music. Now, in the beginning, it was just the elders and maybe the priest singing. But then, when David recognized what it says in the 5 books of Moses, says that there was rejoicing, he interpreted that as singing. And so, with David, you now see that there's songs involved, and you also see that he's submitting instruments. And in the beginning, it says the instruments of David, and then it says the instruments of God. You see that there's a transition of the instruments of David because he submitted, and it says it clearly in the text in Chronicles, he submitted to Gad and Nathan, who were the prophets, and they're like, hey, we think this is a good idea. And then you see that they were included in worship. So we have the harp, and the lyre, and we have the cymbals. And after that, when there was a great reformation, where you see with Ezra, Nehemiah, and Hezekiah and so forth, you see these instruments mentioned accompanying the singing. And so what I think is important to notice, especially in the Reformation, is they recognized that the reason why we still now call it a song service is because while we are no longer sacrificing a lamb, that time of singing is supposed to hearken back to the great sacrifice of the Lamb of God. It is a service of song. It's not a performance. It's not just, hey, I'm doing this for you, or I'm just doing this for God. No, in that moment, you are facilitating for God's people to recognize his sacrifice and for the voices of the people to be heard to worship him as an expression of appreciation of that sacrifice. And so the Reformation then said, okay, listen, people need to understand what they're being sung to, and they want to sing not just with the spirit, but with understanding also, as Paul says. So we need to sing in our own language. That was change number one. Let's sing in our own language. Now,
that's a key shift.
That is a key shift.
We go from Latin to German, English,
whatever,
French.
And that in and of itself already changes it tremendously. Because music was primarily sacred during those times, but it was in a different language. So it really didn't hit home. They didn't recognize, what was being said. But now you have the change of language. So imagine somebody comes and then they start singing, holy, holy, holy. And you're like, wow, this is my language. And then he looks at you. The leader looks at you and says, you repeat after me. And now the people all together go, holy, holy, holy. He continues, Lord God Almighty. And they're like, Lord. I mean,
it starts to hit the heart.
It does. It hits the heart. And out of the sudden, you have a congregation who is no longer just made to feel that they are, too stupid to worship God because they have no degree. They have not learned the languages.
Now they're participating.
Now they're participating. They're saying, no, God can be approached by you.
So was there a particular reform as it started? Was it just kind of general across the board? Did Luther have a role in this, or Calvin, or both of them? Was there a difference, or yeah?
Many of them obviously were
Was it just organic? The same time we translated the Bible, we're translating hymns, or
right? Music, took part of worship, throughout the times. But as it relates to the person who could be coined back to having made a very significant change for entire nation, I think worldwide, was Martin Luther.
Okay.
Martin Luther, because he had this natural talent of music, of not just being a good singer and well able of carrying with his voice, but also being a writer. So he was the guy that also wrote music. And because he was so creative, he said, why should we only sing in unison? Let's just sing in a way that everybody can join. Not everybody can sing the melodies that high. Let's add an alto, let's add a tenor, let's add a bass part. And he would write it out, all four parts. In fact, He was very strong statements of saying, if you're a teacher, I will not even look at you unless you are capable of writing music or singing in worship. I mean, he was intense. And so imagine this. He starts with changing the language. He also then writes his own music. And he takes music to the next level of making it also in harmony. So now people are really joining. And the clergy was fairly upset about this. In fact, they used this as a theological battle against him. They said, Luther, the Bible says the Lord our God is one. So we shall sing Gregorian chants in unison.
Wow.
But Luther came back and said, listen, there's three in one, the Blessed Trinity, if you check on it. And so he then said, your understanding of God is very limited and in fact is unbiblical. And we will not only continue to sing, we will continue to sing in harmony. And so that really changed everything.
So he's the one that brought harmony into Christianity.
Very much so. And guess who he inspired? Some years later, Johann Sebastian Bach was reading about Luther, and he was inspired by the hymns that he wrote. And many of the arrangements he started were based on hymns that Luther had written, and he just then made them more magnificent with arranging them in ways that then, went over. And we still, today, people would say that Johann Sebastian Bach is like the Old Testament for musicians. There's no way that can pass by of recognizing the rich heritage of that music.
That's fascinating. I mean, I don't know much about I'm not studied the music like you are, but I didn't know that these parts and that is really a Reformation thing too.
Oh yeah. Oh, totally. And so then was
it something that was going on outside of Christian circles and he brought it in, or he kind of invented it?
No, he was kind of the person that, from what we know, that really made it most popular for the churches to adopt and say, hey, this is really working well. Let's make this happen. And so it's interesting today that, when you look at someone who still sings hymns, it's like, wow, you're such a conservative. But back then you were such
You were
a
like
liberal.
progressive. You were like,
Yeah, I mean, for
cutting
lack of a
edge.
better term, you really advanced in applying it and saying, hey, this is what we're doing. And Luther got in some trouble because he wanted the gospel to be preached in such a way that people were recognizing that it's relevant to them. Obviously, he changed the language to the vernacular. He also was writing about that with Bible translation, and he adds the different parts to it and stuff. But some people took offense because he noticed that there were some songs that they would sing in the beer tents and whatever else that were really good melodies, and he recognized people they like the
them up.
melodies, and so he said, "Hey, listen, why should the devil only have the good melodies?"
Mhm.
So he would just take the melody and he would put Christian lyrics to them.
Sanct-
And sanctified, if you will. And people loved it. Now, there are others who looked down upon that and said, nah, we should not have that. And you see that even to this day with a person like Zwingli, another reformer, right? Who then brought another perspective to that, which some Puritans really held on to. They said, nah, we should not have any other song be just, Christianized, if you will. We're not going to do that because it is an influence of the world. So our songs have to be written by us. They cannot be adopted. Number 2, we should not have any instruments being added because they're made by the works of men. No instruments whatsoever. Now, some of the reformers would agree with that because, the very ornamentation of the organs back in the day, they said it was idol worship. Get the organ out.
Let's unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah.
As you brought up instruments. So, yeah. I mean, we see instruments in the Bible.
Yes.
And so now you're saying there's contention about whether instruments should even be in church. What's the role of instrument? In fact, yeah, let's unpack that a little bit now. Yeah.
I think there's a confluence of things historically, as you see, because now that the music, the vocal music became, transitioned to the vernacular, so people sang in their own language. They also noticed that much more input was coming from the various people groups that were now singing. So worship now goes to everybody. However, we also see a transition that music was not only being performed in the churches, but it also started being performed in secular venues more fully. And when this shift happened, you see that in God's churches, most of the time they were known for sacred music that was vocal, and then secular music was mostly known for being instrumental. And that was an interesting transition. And the reason may be because when you're singing, you have to actually put words to your worship. Yeah. So notice in Daniel chapter 3, when Nebuchadnezzar says, hey, you will hear the music, then bow down. You have no mention whatsoever of lyrics. It is just, what would they have said? Oh, bow down to this great golden image. I mean, so there's something that gives way, with the words. That's why words and the accompaniment has to match. But the Old Testament does mention instruments. You have the one instrument that God actually ordained specifically for worship, and some people miss that. They think it's the harp, but it's actually the trumpet. Numbers chapter 10, you can see that. The one silver trumpet, second silver trumpet, the shofar horn. And then you have the various instruments that then David added, and the Lord was very pleased with that. And he added them as well. You have to recognize that the instruments were there to support the lyrics, not to supplant them. You will not see a worship in the Old or New Testament where it's just a instrumental piece per se. It was typically accompanied. And so you see the different, and that's why the worship wars come into play here as well. We don't have to tap into that, but obviously the symbol is being used, but you see that the symbol was being used by the leader, typically by the leader. And we cannot superimpose a Western worldview on the biblical text. Jewish music is not as metric as ours is. And so you have some of the more percussive instrument. In percussion, there's some pitched percussive instrument and unpitched percussive instrument. We can get into that at another point. But when they're used, they were used by the leaders, and they may be used between the verses, the stanzas, so that you have hundreds of people that know, hey, this is the stanza when it's starting again. And when you see the drums being used, you typically have seen them used by the virgins, if you will, by the ladies. They were using them, and it was often a response to, hey, we have done well in war. We want to recognize, that somebody has done extensively well, like Saul and David. He killed 1,000. Oh, he killed 10,000, and they were playing on their hand drum. Miriam, when they crossed the Red Sea, they were just rejoicing over that. And so, yeah, there's drums. Drums are being used in the Bible, but you don't necessarily see that being used in the worship service. Neither did you see females, leading out in the worship services. So there's all of these these things that you need to look in more carefully when you extrapolate some principle from that. You can't say, well, there's no drums and bells. No, they are, but how were they used? Were females also able to lead in worship? Well, yeah, they were, but in what setting? And how did it work? And what effect can that have? And I think today we have to look at some of those items as well. But in the Old Testament, you see that instruments were being used. In the New Testament, you also see that some instruments are being used. And obviously the 144,000 have a harp in their hand, right? And they're going to be using that instrument as well. So it's something that goes along with. But if you think of the Christian church, many times persecuted for their faith, and being in the mountains and being, in the forest and whatnot, often they didn't have the privilege of having the instruments. You used your own voice. And with that, you also have to understand, if you look at American history with the slaves and so forth, with the music that you have there, sometimes there was no instruments, but the body was used as an extension for the instrument. So when you made a loud shout, well, guess what? If you were stripped of all of your instruments, you're going to clap, you're going to stomp your feet, you're going to shout, because that is part of you expressing yourself in a way that you now can, respond to the Lord's deliverance. And so you see the various developments that way. But the instruments in the Western culture, especially in Europe, because they were so ornamented, and that, with the artwork that came with it, many rejected it and said, no, this is just drawing too much attention to the instrument and not drawing attention to the Lord. And so there was this schism of people and congregations that decided, no, we're only going to use vocal music, and we're not going to utilize instruments at all. So if you go to Switzerland today, to Zurich, you will not find a thick hymn book there. In many of the churches, you will find a very thin hymn book. And you know what? It is in the vernacular. It has no instruments whatsoever. The melody has only one line, no harmony whatsoever. And the lyrics are precisely what it is in the biblical text from the Psalms. Not even hymns, poetry, so to speak, that is based on the Bible could be utilized, because that was tainted with the world. It had to be exactly the text. That's the text. And so it's interesting, right, to see it that way, because when you think of Adventist heritage and our hymnal, obviously that there are songs that were based on the Bible, but they were expounding on it, just like we have sermons today. And you also see that there are some songs that you could see even in secular settings, like "Oh Danny Boy" is a song that we have in the hymnal. It's "I Cannot Tell," and so you can see that our heritage here also is playing into it in our understanding of music and worship.
Okay, well, gonna take a little break here. This is fascinating. We've looked at music in the Bible, touched on Old Testament, New Testament. We've touched on Gregorian chants, Reformation. We've touched on, I find fascinating, the beginning of parts in music and how that came into Christian singing and so on. We still are going to look at what role music plays generally in our movement. We're going to unpack a little bit more about original music today. And I'm going to ask you some of your favorite hymn writers are. So those of you who are listening, just stay with us. We're just going to take a short break now. This is Lineage Journey Podcast. Thank you for joining us. And we'll be back with you after our short break.
Lineage is a non-profit organization kept running by generous donors like you. Support us today on patreon.com/Lineage Journey.
History shapes identity. Identity shapes mission. And a clear mission determines the trajectory of your future. Knowing where you come from is key to understanding your present purpose and your future mission. Lineage Journey is a series of videos that will take you on a journey through time, discovering the key people and events that have shaped the Christian faith. From the Waldenses to Martin Luther to Zwingli, from England to France, Switzerland to Germany, the light broke over the horizon of Europe, piercing through the dark ages, and then spread out over the world. As the United States of America rose to supremacy, Christianity formed the bedrock of this great nation. And so from the Great Awakening to the Great Disappointment and beyond, Lineage follows the journey of God's church throughout time, immersing you in the places, the stories, and the people through whom Christianity has shone the brightest. Join us on a journey through time. Follow us on social media at Lineage Journey, or check out our website at lineagejourney.com.
Has finding a church pianist been a struggle for you? We understand. That's why we developed the Know Him app. Know Him is an iPhone and Android app which includes piano accompaniments of all 695 hymns from the current Seventh-day Adventist hymnal. Yep, you heard that right. And no, it doesn't sound like an emotionless synthesized MIDI keyboard. The hymns are recorded in real time, over 45 hours worth of piano recordings. Wow. The app also includes the lyrics as well as the background stories and biographical sketches of the authors and composers of each hymn. To donate or download the app, visit our website at www.knowhymn.com.
Lineage Journey not only produces video content, but instructive and illuminating resources to teach young and old about Christian history. Lineage has produced an educational coloring book for people of all ages. It includes original artwork from Ashley Bloom, highlighting the various heroes of the Reformation. Each scene has a matching story, and there are also QR codes to connect you to the website for more information and to watch the videos. There are also fun facts and memorable quotes to accompany the scenes to color in. Designed for young and old alike, get your copy now at lineagejourney.com.
Welcome back, everyone. Appreciate you being with us on this journey as we go into different aspects of our history. And we're here with Dr. Erwin Nanasi as we're looking at the role that music has played in the Reformation, in religion, in Adventism, and so on. And we've looked at a fascinating history. We've gone back to the Bible, pre-Reformation and Reformation. And so now we're kind of picking up. So we've looked at the role that Luther's played. Let's fast forward a little bit now to the last 150 years or so. Like, what role has music played in Adventism? We know of our early pioneers singing hymns. We hear about, some of those stories. So what's our kind of background or heritage, and where do we kind of pick up?
Well, let's pick up with a person that is probably known to most Seventh-day Adventists. That's James White.
Yeah.
Right? James White is the person that in 1843 in a little town of Litchfield Plains in Maine in the winter, he just came about and he began a service very dramatically by just marching down the center aisle of the meeting house and was beating on his Bible. And he was probably walking, I do that sometimes, right? Start in the back of the church. And he was pounding on his Bible while singing, "You will see the Lord a-coming, you will see the Lord a-coming, you will see the Lord a-coming in a few more days." And people are joining with him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, wow, what song is this? And then he continues, while the band of music.
Did he make this one up?
Well, he didn't write this one, but he was definitely, performing it.
Yeah.
And so it is something that he shared that he wanted to have buy-in with other people, and he did it even without any instruments or any other aid, just the vocal music itself. And often later then instruments would be added, and obviously his son played the piano or the organ. And so it came from there. But that's somewhat the starting point long before the church was organized in 1863. And James was a person who said, singing is so important that the first official Seventh-day Adventist hymnal was published under the title, Hymns for Those Who Keep the Commandments of God and the Faith of Jesus.
That's a serious...
I mean, that's solid, right? That's a solid title right here. And it was published on the Seam Press on the Seventh-day Adventist Publishing Association in Battle Creek, Michigan in 1869. So there was not a whole lot of time after the church was organized that they recognized we got to have songs that all of us can be passionate about. And I would submit to any Christian listening to this podcast right now that it would be good for us to have a repertoire of songs where you don't just know the first verse or maybe the first words, but you actually know, the entirety of the song, to see the progression of the sermon. Many times that was what it was.
Mm-hmm.
The sermon was just a summary of a sermon.
Tells a message.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And so cutting out verse 3 or 4, well, you may not get the entire sermon that way,
Yeah.
So it's definitely something that comes in very beautifully. And some of the hymnals cannot editorially include all the 12 verses that were there.
Mhm.
But, if it was worth mentioning in sermon, it was worth singing about. And so today, if you're a preacher and you're listening to this, preach sermons that are worth singing about.
Hmm.
Because there may be an artist in your congregation who will
Who's
listen to it and says, I like this so much that I am going to write a song about it. And then the world will sing it afterwards.
So we've got James White. So right at the time of the Great Disappointment, you've got music integral as part of the religious experience from the beginning. And
From
obviously
very
the
beginning.
Adventist Church wasn't formed then. It came about 20 years later. You've got
Mhm.
music kind of integral in the movement from the very beginning.
And all of the titles of these hymnals were really intense. I mean, you have another one in 1886, and that one was entitled The Seventh-day Adventist Hymn and Tune Book for Use in Divine Worship. And that was also known as the Hymns and Tunes, which many people remember from that name. Over 1,413 songs, and they were categorized in various sections that were correlating with some of the doctrines that we were holding on to. And that hymnal was actually reprinted in a number of times in 1930, and then even after, up to 1941 or so. What many people don't realize is that the song that some may have known it's called Christ in Song, was written by F.E. Belden. Now, Belden was a prolific writer, Franklin Edson Belden.
And around what year did he live?
Franklin Edson Belden was born in 1858 and he died in 1945.
Okay.
Now, Belden is this guy that you may have heard about when they used to have camp meetings. That during the camp meetings, he would just listen to it, he would look at his wife, and when the Lord would speak to him through a sermon, he would write down the lyrics, or he would write down the tune and his wife would write down the lyrics. By the end of the sermon, they would have completed the song, would teach it to the congregation, and by the end of camp meeting, they would have published a little hymn book.
Wow.
Well, if you have a person like this, it was inspiring other people to praise the Lord. And so now it was no longer about, wow, did you hear what this person preached about? No, just take the song because it was a memorial of what they had heard of. And they wanted to take it in their various communities and then go from there. It was just accompanying this great revival and reformation. And so music has this power of sharing that in a way that is very memorable. And that is one of the purposes of music, to store in our minds the things that God has done. Look at the Psalms. I mean, it's like, if the Lord has done this for them, can he do it for us? Yes, he can. Sing about it. And your faith is growing. And as you're singing, even if you're not believing it, as you're singing, it's like, I might as well believe what I'm singing because if this is actually happening, this is amazing. And that's what we're doing, right? Great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto thee. And so you're edifying the church body. And so when he published that hymnal in 1900, and it was revised and then published again in 1908 with nearly 1,000 songs, 1,000 numbers, it was supposed to be that last hymn book because he thought the Lord is going to come and this is going to be hymn.
Original songs.
Many of them were original by him. And so a lot of people really enjoyed it. Now, there was a little bit of a fallout if you read about it more fully. Belden had had compiled this hymnal, and the General Conference really enjoyed that. And like with James White's books, they often would come and ask them, hey, could we adopt this hymnal? A lot of people are singing it. It's in circulation already. Couldn't we adopt it and make it an official hymnal? And many times they would agree. Belden, in fact, he agreed and he said, if you would be so kind that any revenue that is coming from these hymnals that you would put toward evangelism, that would be really fitting for the purpose. And so they came up with this amount that seemed so high for them at that time, saying, $30,000. If it reached the 30,000, then we already had done a good job. Well, the General Conference understood it that if it was more than the 30,000, then they could allocate the money to whatever they pleased, wherever it was most needed. Well, Belden, the artist that he was, got a little emotional about it. And so he said, I don't really like that. I think it would have been better for you to just continue to put it to evangelism. As you see, the Lord has been blessing toward this end. And so he wrote an over 40-page letter, I think, to the conference president and outlined the reasons and says, maybe it should just be our publishing house that is in charge of it, and then we'll disperse it toward evangelism. He got so worked up about it that, in fact, he stepped back from the church. In a way that it's a shame. It's saddening as well. But many people still sing the songs that he had written, and some of them are still mentioned in the Bible. He was in the hymnal. Some of the songs that he wrote were specifically written for children. That's also why he had so much buy-in. 'Tis love that makes us happy.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Songs like that you hear one time that God is
catch
love.
on.
Yeah, they catch on. He had a gift for that. And so it was beautiful. You know, Adventist hymnody overall became much stronger after the Great Disappointment because they had a common experience of
They sang
having
about
gone through that, and they sang about it. But instead of having songs that are really depressing and sad, compare that with German music in the Dark Ages. A lot of the songs are in minor tunes, are very sad. It's like we are forlorn in the lost country. There's no more hope, kind of idea. But here, these songs are not just singing about the disappointment, but they're singing about the divine appointment of the second coming in such a way that it has pathos, it has power, it just rings with freedom and liberty, right? And so the songs that they were writing just inspired that so much that many other hymnals also included these songs, and the Adventist hymnals also included songs by other denominations because they were focusing on some of these theological tenets we could agree with, like the second coming. It's like, this is amazing. Let's talk about his salvation. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, because it seems like as we come into Adventists, as you mentioned, you've got these guys, but the hymns are quite theological and unique to the experience of early Adventism in that we are rediscovering the doctrine of the second coming, rediscovering the doctrine of the Sabbath, sanctuary. And so you have hymns that are written about that, which reflects the experience that the church was going through.
Yes.
And I mean, I find it fascinating.
Well, let me just make this mention. Adam, could it be that because they had this common experience that the Lord obviously had ordained and is prophesied, that also their music was so united in reflecting that? Can it be that because our church right now may not have such a united experience, that our music may be all over the place? So my hope is that as we are experiencing revival and reformation, and the Holy Spirit is descending on us for the loud cry, that it would be accompanied with the great outflow of original musical writing, where it says, this is our experience, this is our song. And out of the sudden, people will catch on to that. So in some ways, it may be better that we don't have that much original music, because it would be testifying of, an experience that is not there. We're manufacturing something, if you will. But this is not to say that there's not a time for us to write music now. In fact, you see in 1941, the hymnal was published that was there for over 55 years. And the church members said, well, is this the only hymnal that we have? Are these the only songs that can be sung? The Sabbath school department started publishing hymns. Other departments started publishing hymns. People in the various regions all around the world were publishing hymns in their own languages. And so they came together for general conference sessions all the time. And at some point, Wayne Hooper and also Melvin West and others got together and were encouraged to perhaps compile a hymnal. And so what they did is, let's just get together and see what the music is like in our world church. And people were asked to submit music.
So before that, we just had scattered hymnals.
Yeah.
Around the world.
That's what it was. And primarily it was also by, private companies that had published and compiled hymns and then put them together. Copyright wasn't as strong back then. They were more pleased to know that their songs were published. And you may have gotten a little fee by you handing it over to them because it was already written and they could just adopt it. Whereas later, and especially in nowadays, copyright becomes very much an issue, because that's often the only way that it could pay for the artist to actually have, bread and butter.
Hey, before we go into that, do you mind if we just go way back a bit?
Let's do it.
And I think if we finish this podcast without discussing the Adventism connection to Methodism,
oh yes,
or Wesley,
yes,
we'll have done a disservice. So before we jump up to maybe the last 20 years or so, what role did the Wesley brothers or Wesley play in music?
It works in perfectly, because the hymnal that we had prior to the current one that we have right now was published in 1941.
Okay.
And as they all got together, the question that you just asked me is the question that Melvin West and that Wayne Hooper were asking themselves as well. Said, what principles should we adhere to make sure that the hymns that are being submitted are going to be suitable for divine worship for a multi-generational, multi-ethnic, congregation worldwide. And it can be in circulation for more than just 1 year or a camp meeting, but maybe for 30 years. And that's, by the way, the time that they wanted to have the current hymnal be available. Since 1985, it was 30 years. Well, obviously, we have gone over that a little bit. But they went back to Methodism, which you rightly mentioned already. So the Wesleyan brothers, they were looking at the hymns and they enjoyed many of them, but they definitely did not enjoy the fact that they were not being sung with energy and with enthusiasm. And so they came up with these rules for singing as a part of the hymnal produced the same year in 1780. And so, listen to some. I'm abbreviating them a little bit, but
So they came up with their own hymnal.
Yes,
the
they
Wesleys,
did.
and then they kind of added some rules to it. as to how
Yes,
it
they
should be
did.
used.
Yes,
Okay.
they did. So these are rules. So imagine you getting into the church and you being handed the hymnal, and like you have a preface of any book. In this preface, it says, "By the way, this is how these hymns ought to be sung." And it really harkens back to others in the Reformation. Even Bach himself, when he would play for his students, he would play it for them, and then he would just make a remark such as, "This is how it must be played." And so they were really fond of the principles and adhering to that and coming as close to the divine perfection as possible. And so this is their attempt to do so. One of the principles is this one: learn these tunes before you learn any others. Afterwards, learn as many as you please. So they were saying, in order for you to have a good basis, you must learn this repertoire and then add other ones, beyond it. And so they came together with some of the fundamental, hymns that shared the Christian experience. So they wanted them to learn these tunes before they went to others. Number 2, sing them exactly as they are printed here without altering or mending them at all. This is before you're making them your own, really learn these to the best of your ability and go from there. Now, the church was fairly illiterate at that time. Printing press had only been invented a little bit before that. Now that hymn books are in circulation, often it was the handmaid to the Bible. They would then have it available, but even to this day, you see, notes are, all over the place. People may be able to follow it, they may not be able to follow it. And that's the beauty of the hymns. Hymns, may not be as exciting to some because they're not that fast. Well, if they would be too fast, then the chronologically more advanced members of the church would not be able to keep up. But if they're too slow, then the children would not be able to sing them either.
Sure.
So it has to have a certain level that has a predictability that says, okay, I think I can do this. So the more verses you had, in a sense, actually made it better because there was repetition involved that then deepened the impression of the hymn. And so here you have them say, sing it exactly as they were written. Number 3, sing all. See that you join with the congregation as frequently as you can. So it wasn't supposed to be a concert, but just a few up front. In fact, camp meetings back in the day, it wasn't just led by 4 or 6 or 8 people. It was led by a host of people, maybe 50, 100, or 200 up front. And it was like a choir. But all they were singing were the hymns. All they were singing were what was printed. It wasn't some special music. What was special about it was that it had a special place in the worship service of saying, we really want to honor the Lord once again. That's what it was. His presence is really what makes something, what makes the music item, special. Sing lustily with a good courage. Beware of singing as if you were half dead or half asleep. So
Wow.
you can imagine that the songs that Wesleyan brothers were writing were also songs that didn't really permit somebody to go to sleep. They wanted songs that actually had that energy. Let me just read, the other 3 as well. Sing modestly. Do not bawl, so as to be heard above or distinct from the rest of the congregation. Now listen. If you ever conducted a choir or you listen to a choir, what makes a choir unique is when they are blending together in such a way that you do not hear distinct voices out. And so what the Wesleyan brothers were saying is, we in our congregation could have such a sound that we're all blending in together. That's quite amazing. Above all, sing spiritually. Have an eye to God in every word you sing. Aim at pleasing Him more than yourself or any other creature. In order to do this, attend strictly to the sense of what you sing. And that's beautiful, I mean, imagine we would actually mean what we sing, right? I surrender all, and actually mean it.
Yeah.
Not I surrender some, or
It always annoys me when song leaders say sing like you mean it.
Yeah.
Like that's
Wow.
you shouldn't sing like you
Right.
shouldn't do anything like you mean it. You should sing it because you mean it.
Correct. Or don't sing it at all.
Yeah.
Sit down. That's essentially what they were saying, and it really encouraged hymn singing, unlike others had seen, and it goes far away. I mean, Wesleyan brothers are still known.
I mean, they were
to this day
prolific
for that.
writers, weren't they? Didn't they?
Excellent, right?
They write numerous classic hymns as well that
Right.
we still sing today.
Right, and I think it is part of understanding that as a minister, music takes part in worship, and so perhaps taking the time to prepare a message But also, if you're not capable of doing so, somebody else being inspired of saying, hey, would you mind putting a poem to this, or maybe put this to song? Because that's what the Western Brothers would do. They would spend some time in methodical Bible study, right? But then they also would spend some time in writing about it in such a way that it would make a dent. So if you have a song to sing, I mean, you rather preach, for less time, but have a song and the people can sing the song and it remains with them, then give them a long discourse without a song and the people have a hard time remembering what you talked about. That's essentially what they were going for. So fast forward then, with the Adventist hymnal that then was published in 1985, you have a committee that comes together and includes 695 hymns with 224 scripture readings. And you have it categorized in 12 subcategories, and it includes American spirituals, it includes Negro spirituals, it includes Bach chorales, it includes Scandinavian folk songs, other traditional and contemporary hymns as well, and it has it from all times. I mean, the oldest hymn in the current hymnal, is number 555. It's from the 2nd century. And so that's the oldest hymnal that you have. So you have a variety, spanning forth. And I think it's important for us to notice today that Jesus said we have to take out of the storehouse the old and the new. And so there's beauty of building on what has been before. And there's beauty, as you said, to have music also today and being originally written. And I do believe that the Lord is close to us today. And He is leading to us. And they're powerful sermons that are being preached. Where are the musicians? Where are those that can write about it and actually, publish his fame abroad? What about the sanctuary? What about the state of the dead? What about the spirit of prophecy? People need to hear about this. And so if you're preaching sermons that are not really worth singing about, you may really want to reconsider what you're preaching about.
Telling stories that no one can write a song. Yeah, interesting. So let's so you mentioned before we took a little break or went back, Wayne Hooper. So we're going to just talk a bit about maybe the Adventist hymn, but I also wanted to ask maybe as you articulate around to that, like what resources as well are out there today for people. We'll kind of get into that. But so at least in the Adventist Church today, we have this Adventist hymnal, which was put together in 1985, I think it was.
It was.
I think it was to kind of reflect, and it's kind of become a benchmark in our church, but I don't know, like it'd be nice to see more stuff or new stuff or whatever. But
yeah, well, Wayne Hooper and Melvin West themselves in their preface made it very clear that this hymnal was suitable perhaps for 30 years. But then a new generation would come and they would need a hymnal themselves. Now, obviously, there was a 55-year period from the last hymnal until this one was published. And so if we're following that trend, it may be a while until we have another hymnal. But I would submit that perhaps we need to get together and collect the hymns that already have been written, the various theme songs for youth conferences, for conferences in the unions or divisions, right? There are several songs that have been very beautiful
theme songs,
right? And you sing them for a week and you enjoy them, and then what happens to them, right? And so collecting them and saying, hey, these are wonderful, and maybe also challenging them and say, hey, we would like to have more songs about the Sabbath, and the best 10 songs will make it into this publication. I mean, even in the Sabbath School Quarterly, how awesome would it be if, every week there may be a new hymn that is in there that people could learn
for that week.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be that big, but just the encouragement of saying, hey, God is still leading, and there's still some songs that we can sing about. Many of the writers, even in this hymnal, they did never intend that their songs would be published. They just wrote them as a processing of their experience. But it was so encouraging to others that they said, no, this really needs to be included. So in 1988, Wayne Hooper and Melvin West said, we need to write a companion to the hymnal. We need to...
Yeah, that's fascinating.
So the companion then said, okay, let's write a bit more about the history. Let's write a little bit more about, how these hymns came about, why we included them, why we may have changed some of the verses. There's a reasoning behind it. In fact, there's something that they mention right in the beginning of the introduction. It says, for many worshipers, hymn singing is a mere routine in the church service, accepted but not necessarily enjoyed. For others, the pleasure of making a joyful noise to God often obscures the words that are being sung, and thereby this essential part of worship loses its full significance. And so they recognized it even back then. In 1988, they recognized it and said, well, unless we make it meaningful, and what can make it meaningful? So their attempt of saying, hey, let's include the stories, let's include more of the biographical sketches of them, and share the theological tenets that we adhere to. And so that is something that during the pandemic, people have approached me about, and others, and I was privileged to get to know a man by the name of Charles Benjamin, and I think it was just divinely ordained. So I find myself at the camp meeting, and I'm playing the piano, and the family is watching me attentively, and then I step down, and then he looks at me, and I don't know this man, right? So he looks at me and he says, "Do you like technology?" And I said, "I like technology. I'm not very good at it, but I like it." And then I looked at him and I said, "Do you like music?" I said, "I like it. I'm not very good at it, but I like it." I said, "Okay, well, can we work together?" And he said, "That's what I was going to say." And so turns out this man is a developer. And he said, "Erwin, people need to have more access to the hymns worldwide. What do you think if there was an app?" And so one of the resources that I was privileged to be a part of is the No Hymn app that is available on Google Play and also on the iOS store. So what we have done is we have essentially digitized what you have available right now with the hymns. You have the lyrics, and I recorded the hymns that now for churches or prison ministries or visitation or whatever you may want to use it for. You have the accompaniment that is not in a MIDI sound, like, electronic synthetic sound. It's actually a real person playing. And then you also have the background stories from the companion. Now,
you said that very quickly, but I just want to make sure our listeners hear this. So there's you and a team of others have created an app.
Yes.
On Apple phones, on Android phones,
yes,
Apple Store, Google Store, that has all the hymns.
All the hymns
that are played by yourself.
Yes.
So live playing.
Yes.
Put onto the app. So
yes.
So someone could just listen to it, or they could use it for congregational
Correct.
amplification.
Correct.
Or whatever.
Correct.
And you said the stories are there as well.
Yes. So
it's fascinating. So
it is.
So you say the app's called No Hymn.
Yeah, it's a play on words. No Hymn is spelled K-N-O-W from
as in,
knowing someone.
I know you.
Yes, right.
So No Hymn.
Hymn, and then hymn is H-Y-M-N.
Okay.
And so this is part one of a larger vision, and the larger vision is, hey, we're building our heritage on what has gone before, but we also recognize that there are themes and topics that may be of interest for you today. And so we're hoping that this app could be the platform for theologians, for pastors, for members, right? To say, hey, this really speaks to me. I have a little chorus that I may have written, or there may be a musician who reads that poem and says, I could put that to song. And so to continue that heritage and say, hey, there's still songs to be written, and then use the very same platform.
So you want people to submit and.
Yes, that is the ultimate vision. Although right now we have a lot of requests for, hey, can you do this for another hymnal in another language? Can you do this for us because we don't have a piano? And throughout the pandemic, many of the musicians that would typically play were not able to play. And that's how it really started. People would call me on Friday afternoon and say, hey, my pianist can't come. Can you play these songs for me so I can use them for worship? Can you do this and that? And then after 3 months or so of doing that, people then said, Erwin, why do we have to always ask you? Just record them all already. I said, oh, brothers. And, the Lord really blessed. I recorded them in less than 10 days.
Oh, wow.
All the, it's really 700 hymns or more, because some of them are not itemized with numbers. But it was a great blessing going through that and reading through the lyrics and seeing that. And so you can use it also just as a background player. That's one of the resources that is available. Okay. Obviously, if you're interested in some of the historical aspects that we just touched on today, I also had written about that in my dissertation.
Okay.
Because it is a case study on congregational hymn singing. So we look at the characteristics and the benefits. So if you type in my name and type in dissertation, my name will probably pop up, and you can read about it more. There's more to be said. And with music, there's more caught than is taught. And that's why it is so important that we're actually actively involved in, singing and in playing. And I'm hoping that if you're listening to this and you have children or grandchildren, that you will encourage for them to continue, because by being a Protestant, by being a reformer, by being part of the Adventist Church, music is integral to worship.
It's true. We often say, but I think you would agree, the best songs are still to be written.
Yes.
And the best songs are still to be sung. And like you said, music reflects our experience. And I think what God's people and movement still have to go through.
Yes.
Is far greater and more intense in a sense than what we have been through in the past.
Yes.
And I think that will lend itself to new original music that reflects the experience coming up.
It does. And I think that coming with the revival that we will experience as a people, I also think that music will not just be a reflection of that, but will also be proactive in that. You remember that when Joshua went around the walls of Jericho, the musicians were right up front.
Mm.
You remember when they would have the army, sometimes the musicians were right up front. That was their weapon. And so I think that even to this day, as the law is being introduced, like they were holding up the tabernacle or they were holding up the Ark of the Covenant, the musicians, as they were blowing their shofar horn, as they were singing their songs of praise, I do believe that the second coming is going to be ushered in by a certain sense of music. And just to come back to the various powers that be with music, it is obvious that Daniel, the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation they are together, right? They're paired together. And in Daniel chapter 3, you see that nobody was asked to bow down in front of that image without the music being played. Well, can it be today that music, if it is not used for divine purposes, that there is a counterfeit of music that may try to unite people in such a way that they succumb to that mark of the beast, if you will, at the very end of time? I do believe so. And so it is important for us to counteract that by actually truly worshiping God in spirit and in truth, so that we do not succumb to other types of music that unite us more into, worshiping the devil and bowing down before his image.
True. Well, appreciate everything you've shared. It's been fascinating, and I'd love to do another podcast with you another time.
Yeah.
Unpack some of these aspects in more detail, but maybe just end on one question. Who's your favorite hymn writer? And I know when you ask a musician or a creative, who's your favorite one, they sometimes have a hard time picking just one out. But if there's one that maybe stands out to you today as a favorite hymn writer or that you have.
Yeah.
And why?
Well, I think that the go-to for me has always been Amazing Grace. But I will say this, that recently, when I recorded all the hymns and I was going through them and I was also reviewing the stories, that there was another song that really stuck out to me, and it didn't stand out to me quite as much before, but that is the song of There Is a Fountain. There is a fountain filled with blood by William Cooper. And I'll just mention this, that in the hymn you have 6 stanzas involved. And this man found himself in a mental institution. People thought that that's where he belonged. And while he's there, he's reading the Bible and he's really getting a greater sense of what God has planned for him. He has this inhibition that when he's speaking, he is stuttering. He's not really capable of expressing himself just the way that he wants to. And in this hymn that he's talking about what God has done for him. And then he puts his personal experience in that. And he says, there in a nobler, sweeter song, I'll sing thy power to save, when this poor, lisping, stammering tongue is ransomed from the grave. And I love that, because the hymns are so powerful of speaking about Christ in particular, but they also often share our personal experience in that. And I felt that, hey, I may have inhibitions today, I may feel inadequate to sing his praises, but God is saying, I inhabit the praises of Israel. And so the very infirmities that we may have, the baggage that we may have carried, the past that may seem to want to take over, whatever it may be, if you think of William Cooper, he is saying that although he may have these inhibitions, he may have these limitations, there is a fountain filled with blood drawn from Emmanuel's veins, and sinners plunged beneath that flood lose all their guilty stains. And so I think that if you have listened to this podcast and if there's anything that can stand out to you, is include music as an integral part of your worship and your personal devotions and public ministry, so that you give an opportunity to be reminded that Jesus is forgiving you. If you ask him, you confess your sin, and he's forgiving you, and he wants to transform you so that you can be fashioned into his likeness.
Thank you. I love both those hymns, and they have deep, rich meaning. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for sharing.
Gladly.
And continue to allow the Lord to use you in your ministry, as particular in music ministry, and inspiring other people. And I pray that we see more hymns, more songs that reflect what we believe and what we're going through today.
Amen.
Thank you for those who've joined us on our Lineage Journey podcast. We hope and pray that you have enjoyed this. Do subscribe to our channel so you get regular updates, and there'll be more podcasts coming out soon. May God bless you. And remember, you can always check out more information at lineagejourney.com. Thank you, and God bless.
Thank you for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this episode. Lineage Journey is supported by your generous donations. Did you know that you can donate on a monthly basis? Any amount from $2 to $100 or whatever you decide through patreon.com/Lineage Journey. Your donations go towards the cost of producing our varied content, and we thank you for your support.